Dear Barack Obama and Donald Trump, Judge Napolitano, you guys could help with the plan. I'll donate with the method. I'll donate for the species, for America, and to account for exceptions and exception nature, and because everyone wants to counter where and how the phenomenon of where and how we are individuals grouped and together, and to speak about that requires uses of our names, of our locations, areas, states, selves, everyone around us. And this is exploited by a reaching method relevant to where and to how other things are recorded being and having been blamed, as we know, for the real causes of negative value nature progression, acts and natures. See, but everyone has missed how, even when correctly these things have been blamed, they've been blaming them wrong as collusions with other methods and natures of illusions relevant. For example, uses of the cafeterias distinctly from uses of the individual classrooms at each campus, and I could show you this. Each nature of campus, they are fit with conjunctions to themselves that a breaching method uses to measure and maintain, that use database relationships, that used slash uses the Republic abridged from what can afford defense of its finite, grouped, and altogether its treatments, and simultaneously afford short words using quality and nature of truth that is trying to understand and trying to not leave out the relevance, the significance of what really came true, what really was before we were now. So there is an extent we know now is real, always, not denying the slightest exceptions. And where there's an extent of the past was real, we know always, not denying the slightest exceptions, not valuing the slightest exceptions denied. That extent only, though. See, but when people are speaking about what they know about the past, with finite grouped and together, this is also relevant where and how exceptions in exception nature are being used ulterior from that which we have to speak about for its uses of value, for example, because the same way identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously, value has relativity to identity simultaneously. Computer programs have identity relativity to an identity of value slash value progression. That is the identities. They are mimicking this. They're involved with sequence shifts, cover ups, illusions tied to that, where they make they have complete possession over the sense and sensibilities, to use Jane Austen's phrase, of the entire fact sheet nature, individually grouped and together, and shock and awe's uses of it that are increasing because of use of that and all that um, it propagated, self-cultivated. So the Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoons, LRG, large. Little Rap Guy and Friends, large as F. They are like our founders. They are the whole cartoon value nature system, for example, is criminally foreign influenced. but now they are counter criminally foreign influenced because they were criminally foreign influenced through themselves, just like the real value nature system as humanity. Because the more we stay uses of our names, including our countries, groups, and individual simultaneously, because this is how we discern hyper difference, which the point of difference is about. We discern nature's nature in the value of that simultaneously. And that is simultaneously the extent of its hyper invisible but discernible hyper conjunction to the conjunctions we know as mind, as consciousness, boxing. The sciences share an identity. There are proofs is more probable and is more practical, for example, and it is simultaneously increasingly demonstrable that boxing, wrestling, and martial arts were revealed as a part where the sciences share an identity and pair not to the relativity slash hyper relativity of a special difference comes into play in many play. So this is a website of this. This is a website. This is a YouTube channel. There's a YouTube channel that I spoke about. I saw in the title about relativity and Einstein's relativity. I have not read Einstein's theory of relativity, but if you know, listen to my videos, this is hyper relativity is discernible. Relativity is a theory. Hyper relativity is increasingly discernible. That's one of the ways we know it's true. It is the five distinct identities of order as the value of the order of the finite. It also is the value of what really happened before we know, because we can increasingly learn about that. See, but the way we speak about this, there are proofs that a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded modern countries to use themselves remotely while being used remotely simultaneously, multi front. And while having that sustained, knowingly, methodically, while it was having all that caused and kept, encountering it, effectively employed to roles, needs, and natures, blaming on other things, others, or selves. Where and how the breaching method was a part with their all instances, all natures of positive, negative. And the reason they got away with this, it's the same thing against each modern nation, individually grouped and together. It's way worse than just group think. It's group think slash hyper group think, to use the phrase that the government used, which is distinct from ourselves. We can force a quality of fact, human nature outside of interbranch locations, demonstrably for legitimate reasons, extorted they can't go afford the order of the finite. To counter sequence shifts, illusions on off all the roads and routes next to the campuses, all the things that happen on that we know we're going to speak about. Just for example, it's a magic trick they use against many people And see, but when we start getting into this, until we have first being followed the order and method of the breaching method that is fact, human nature oriented, that is conclusive as a summary of fact, human nature oriented predicate acts methods, individually grouped and together, facilitated to roles with a differential criminal foreign influences, not just distinct as parts, individually grouped and together, not just that exploited by other overt criminal enterprises, private ones, original still. Our founders wanted us to demonstrate and communicate for themselves why and how we had to stay. Well, so in other words, people, when I was in middle school, see what they do between the schools when people say things, they're putting fake things in databases. My family likes privacy. I don't even know about my family's friends. And then, in other words, boxing, then if you try to speak about that, people use exceptions in exception nature. Again, for example, where it's relevant, but where it's really relevant, constantly, the subject is where hyper-relevance, hyper-relativity, that really, which is the extent we know always, is true. Now, we know to an extent that time is coming. And the same identity of value / value progression. That is again where and how we need to be able to use that nature of truth / S that does not leave out the slightest exception, nor value it left out, including the relevance of criminal insidiousness, natures of positive and negative treatments, and natural responses themselves. The breaching method employed natural responses to known natures of organized crime, known natures of medical and sexual, and things like that, and family and neighbors' sense and sensibilities relative to that breaching method, that slavery method that had our founders in the trap too, their parents before them. The suburbs were already designed by a sick, crazy, worse than just torture method. Employment to roles with individually grouped in together, everyone, they forced each other, and they are still doing it, humanity, as identities. Of locations, no. Of memory, no. I self-promote boxing, which, in other words, coupled with this, we only move on the things that are really going to be evolution everywhere at once. See, but to do this, see where they have the economies tied. They have development as known. So they have words like development. Where they have positive and negative treatments, words like identity use. The soul, if you will, the mind, if you want, has means to discern. Conjunction to these distinct identities of sequence / simultaneous nature, bound that way through as one. Boxing is fun. Cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall, for example, are bound 3 ways as one. But with 2 identities of sequence / simultaneous nature, no. I self-promote boxings. I teach us things belong. Dear Facebook, even if it wasn't her, it looks like her. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to use your name. Um, I forgot her name. It's Celeste Wells. But when I was in middle school, there were kids who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed roles relevant with predicate acts methods, with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and way worse, and interbranch. And this is relevant where and how differential criminal foreign influences are involved. Uses of wire crime methods, uses of remotely the victims sickly distinctly slash hyper victims, because it was the breaching method that caused the negative value nature progressions. What's going to happen? That slavery entrenched North America and South America. That's not understood. It's not understood because of what they've been doing with a worse than just organized crime method, worse than just war crime method. Therefore, wars having been employed with all the negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, that breaching method employed historically first before our founders and their parents were even born against the Native Americans, sustaining it against them, then them against themselves. And everyone's words were being replaced. Everyone was losing the method that the ancients couldn't believe that anyone would wipe away. How to perceive what? The identity that is everyone's identity at once, really. And all the other life forms and species bodies too. No, distinct, non distinct, and simultaneously. That means individually grouped and together too. There are more ways than just individually grouped and together. How hypergenesis, for example, is demonstrated by the first part of the Old Testament that says all you have to know is right up to here. See, but rather than have a leader step forward and say, and show, this is, in other words, this is where the sciences come together, it says. And it's going to use the rainbow as its thing. So they're trying to make people embarrassed by and overt steal people's identity, the people with the flag, and people that are not with the flag. And the way to counter it is not by countering the people with the flag that are insidiousness, the rainbow flag, and not to counter the people that don't like the flag or what they care about the flag. It's to counter where and how when if you need to use for science, you shouldn't have to debate or have things being present as means to stack upon lie progressions, identity theft / fraud / slander roles, and use of exception and of exception nature uses. Same time. The / relevant in the beginning, same way. Reason. Why? Active, inherent, and progressive. Like we know what is to come. So the identity of nature's nature and the value of that. Those three identities, those three parts of it, where we use what we know is nature and it's positive to itself, and what is not simultaneously. See, but applied syntactically at locations, formal and other, where our roles with differential criminal foreign influences, criminally foreign influence, fact-keeping nature, predicate act methods, plural, but individually bound. And if anyone tries to speak about it, they attach that person to changed words, fake words, all exception, nature, and demonstration of the same thing. They have been now the FBI and state police forms and other agencies, Weathersfield Police. They have roles as victims slash hyper victims, victim predators slash hyper predators. The same way the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and the police forms and interbranch have originally still. For example, used remotely at interbranch locations leading up to the World Trade Center attack. In that context and since, our roles that have been on off legal cases, interbranch locations, using their locations and to further finite details left out where this breaching method, how motivated people could be roles to prevent all this time. The revelations that come from having black pupils, white survives, and exception nature. That's nature's communicating with us the answers. And it's also nature is showing us a breaching method is there. But syntactically, other things, others ourselves were blamed for it. In those locations, in their memories. In all exception nature. At each age of fact, keeping nature. Certain nature of victim that needs to go. Ignore the finite. Where and how passions and emotions are pretended with instances written into databases that they tell you about or not. You know other ways. Other ways of communicating this. Has remote criminally foreign influence uses of parks on off the community center of Weathersfield in ways that is on interstate, internations, relevant ways. This is exploiting our human identity of volume. This is exploiting people that are timed on off campuses, sequence shifts allusions into the bad databases that are connected. So this is relevant where and how nobody wanted roles with that breaching methods, crazy laws. Which trials were real or made up. No one wanted them blamed on anything. No one could afford them blamed on anything besides a predicate acts delivery system method. And if you will, a hyper predicate acts delivery system method. And each modern country that has a native population that resisted to stay their identity long enough. And ourselves, sickly distinctly. The trail to our history is not with each, but it is from before semi-ancient times. Before the sciences became self-valued in defenses of the physical body / bodies. They became criminally foreign influence, therefore, qualities of fact, human nature that couldn't defend themselves and simultaneously counter properly. The worst uses. Note, all exception nature increasingly in demonstration of the same thing. But uses of criminal insidiousness at all locations, areas, and states, everywhere the species body stands. We clap our hands or lift them in ire or what? Everyone's lying about passions and emotions. Otherwise, they change that person's words. Otherwise, they're leaving out exception nature. So is also relevant. So it is functional. How there is there is one identity of hyper invisible, but still discernible. So this was designed to lead all programming. And this is more probably, and is more every algebra class I had at different campuses. They both have roles with people. Two girlfriends I had at Central Connecticut State University, for example. Joanna, too. I remember, and comedian. I didn't put that in the title, other than about black comedians. In other words, the process of training the actors to show the breaching method, just to get shown the logic, how humanity's volume thinks relative to it. And so one way we could do it is putting 13 colonial regies as, simultaneously each state could get their own, you know what I mean? And to tell it. But tell what? Not to tell history. To follow this program / hyper program, the only one that could be it. And it uses exception nature distinctly from everything else. And that's how it's communicating to us, how it is functional being hyper invisible / invisible simultaneously. And that being value right to left / left to right, hyper simultaneously. Value to different things relatively. It's been this new that we'd have to speak about this now through value systems. They use these things like value for the same ways, but not the hyper additional ways at the same time. And increasingly that's the high roles. Self-value, where not just fact-cheating nature, corruption past, way worse than that criminal insidiousness. So all victim predators. They're forcing us to use the other names of other people because it goes back to collusions with illusions at each age of correlation nature. People from other locations, areas, and states, and natures of interest, natures of industry need to highlight progressions onto other locations, including especially differentially too, the different locations and where and how this is relevant. So we have to be read by what is hyper invisible. So before we come to countering and speaking about the methods or that come with the method, because that's how we see it. That's how we discern it. Because two, also, the breaching method itself is individually grouped and together itself. The phenomena of being and having been hyper recorded, but right through, and as what it takes too, discernment of where others pretended perceived. So English history, the history of the languages, comes from the phenomena. This is relevant where the predicate is value as a distinct identity of relationship to itself. That the verb has, where and how the verb is constantly / variably itself. And this being relevant to where and how simultaneously. value is nature / nature is value. And simultaneously, vice versa, this is true. Hyperconversely, and with the order of the value of, the only increasing value of what came true, no matter what, if people lie about it or what, altogether. Because that's lying about its means to communicate with us. It's showing us the value of life and death simultaneously, therefore, what is to come. We know that's come. We know, other extents of time. We know time came to an extent. And we know this time is active now. These three are three different but connected simultaneously. See, it is a method that has the sense and sensibilities of people relevant where differential criminal foreign influence that nobody wants. Nobody wanted. Motivations, natures, needs, interests, apparent. They're never, there's other there. And where that grew made worse, that kept that and that needing to hide life progressions as collusions with itself. That which was exploiting every single identity of colonization, individually grouping together. Then they're sustaining this against Native Americans. And then our founders' parents were born. And they're still sustaining it against Native Americans. Then our founders are born. And they're still sustaining it against Native Americans and our founders, forcing them to hide their roles with the counter that was also had to be counter extorted. Reported true. Ugh. So hyperjournalism is one thing to any country. We don't force. We don't say, "Oh, for you guys aren't going to go into the hyperjournalism," because because the media is told to hide live progressions because they can't afford since founding to be known, communicated actually, what is communicated. And that's where also the relevance of sequence shifts come in, because it's the only way to demonstrate. It's not to blame people or locations. The exception nature is just because those names and words and locations have identities. Not regardless of who's involved in it. And stuff. How the locations tricks catching everyone to fake words. So we put everyone to keep everyone from voicing what has nothing to do with the nature of A, therefore B treatments, only heard by formal voices, suit and ties. I tell no lies. Vaccines, they are a certain type of victim / hyper victim. Camouflage, certain type of victim / hyper victim that has the thought, the logic associated with them, with their names, their identities, the locations where they came from, their opinions, their perception. The database is tied. Assigned needs to hide finite, active, progressive. Means by the short words of any individual, of every individual, relative to this method of identity theft slash fraud slash slander that was sickly distinctly against our founders and stick sickly distinctly against them for that. The truth of how American Revolution was about taxes with the tea tax rebellion, for example, as one of the reasons that is used to lie, that is used as a lie simultaneously. It is used to screen worse lies that seem subtle because of the relativity, not just of criminal insidiousness natures of positive negative identity treatment simultaneously. Ground, but the use of it is a fact treatment nature method, a hyper predicate act delivery system method that already employed the counters to each other. The forced increasingly needed unions of each other. That's why the unity, independence, it's the Trinity. It's not hot or cold. It's not just warm. Criminal seriousness is warm. For what? So in other words, we can make sure. Everyone wants this hypernative. They assigned the words to describe Native American history. Excuse me. I was in the garden thing. I had a painting. The words of American history, they're measured and maintained by a breaching method that measures and maintains and senses through what had nothing to do with that. Because all the things it caused individually grouped in together. It was hyper sophistication slash sophistication before they were non-sophistication slash sophistication. And while they were it, as everyone now, shock and awe. There's a difference between causing positive out of negative that are criminal insidious natures of positives. And causing positive out of negative that is also hyper positive. And this is also relevant to where science demonstrates, how we could receive the answers to things, vaccines. So we have to establish these means, like as mean stacking, like as if as virtual people, the people who own the pantheon, the virtual pantheon, for example. So we need another nature of communications, which is we need the same nature of communications, but we need to be free to be able to detail, not just if we're in if either you're from these bridge sciences locations, which bridge science location are you from? In other words, you need to. There are proofs that all formal locations are discrediting things we already know. And there were people that knew they were going to do that, timed against each people, sickly distinctly. And how it adapts in relative to where and how to use it remotely, the sense and sensibilities of everyone, relative to where and to how it employed the phenomena of people pretending passions and emotions while consciously self-valuing exceptions. And this is what everyone does. So, for example, there are people that went to my grammar school that weren't even in my class. And then they had high life progressions after they graduated. and they put an illusion on Quinnipiac University. They planted evidences with various natures of courts and police forms, also all along roads and routes, like and the locations next to them. Like these are also people out of Hartford Hospital and the locations next to it. And this is where he said, she said, includes differential criminal foreign influence, uses of overt criminal enterprises, private ones in the branches of government, individually grouped and together, and their predicate acts methods too. With the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and insidiousness of people A through Z, relevant to as Vic only know how to speak about and react to things, and all exception, nature, and demonstration of the same thing. Like when people use the words like crimes, it's not just this or counter. In other words, there's still needs in nature to hide recorded what's actually discernible. Their role still with predicate acts delivery system methods, whole predicate acts methods, while simultaneously readings of statutes criminally foreign influence. Certain type of victim, each person who tries to counter the breaching method becomes that stays collusion /S, also relevant where and how memory is being used and location. And the syntax of Trantola, for example, and his narratives by his motivation, their narratives by their motivations. Trantola, please have them get me a name of for the WFSB has some intelligence community on off their location, names associated on off their location through time, who have been planting evidences with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and allowing others to, also relevant where differential criminal foreign influences and motivations roles are. And that goes back to the youngest ages. They even use this from off all locations, off campuses, being sustained, but also through other motivations, nature's needs, interests that are hyper additional to what's apparent. So, for example, there are a whole bunch of police forms that recorded there was state police, Weathersfield police, military police, and a guy who said he was the partner of Kevin Dillon, who's also one of the ones recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. I yelled, did things that to force people to call the police without telling them why one time. And then before, and then the second day came, I was polite, right? But then when I saw it, when I got there, those are the people that were there were recorded, which actually recorded. See, they're 6 weeks in sequences too. Now, these are the people involved with parks and recs, involved with identity theft frauds of that nature and method that are criminally foreign influenced, roles with false predicate acts at interbranch locations that are relevant to, I need to speak about it. They brought it up. I don't know the guy's name, but I remember I know the people that know him. And it's relevant. And there are people like with the, apparently with undercover police forms and they're acting coaches. This is each age and nature of campus. These are fire campuses and medical campuses, also involved in this identity theft, fraud, slander, wire crime methods. How we make it positive out of negative is per the relativity of how the other countries they brought involved with this. For example, 2 times I had girlfriends. One for a short time, they came right involved. People on and off the Weathersfield Police Department where it is now, from Weathersfield. and where they were also involved where it used to be, and spots next to it, with names that were involved with predicate acts on my street relative through time. The family of a neighbor of mine in the religion was repeated into a confessed, demonstrated, recorded roles a Mike DeMaine had and has increasingly with criminally foreign influence uses of on-off Fox Connecticut News, predicate acts, on-off WFSB, predicate acts, on-off New Britain affiliate, NBC affiliate, other journalistic locations where they went to campuses. There are people tied to a Perone family and to a Kerr family who have filmed fake things in the parks and spread and fake ties to people, and then they pretend to know you afterwards. That are criminally foreign influence, as the people involved with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, predicate acts with judges and prosecutors, and their roles with methods this way. As the names involved also at that corner of that street. Also that one of the guys recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed that was involved with abuses of the kids of friends of one and that person themselves, who was one of the ones involved with this. And so they prevent people from countering peacefully. People have been stacking fake things in databases and rolls with that at all locations. These are people rolls with wire crime methods with the agencies where they fabricate audio and video to replace what's actually recorded on and off the police departments. Also, that they've had through time have people call in fake things, and when they call in real things, they're exploiting the exceptions. That's also recorded, and there are recorded means to discern that. They are using a crime method of pretending that you have to prove things in court that are recorded. Where in other words, that's just one thing. They want to like force things to issues, and force blame, leaving out their roles with the predicate acts method, leaving out what's actually recorded. There are a whole bunch of people tied to a Mike DeMaine, a Mike Roberts also, into a kid, into a black kid, and the other minority of black boys and girls from Wethersfield, exploited, but through themselves, through uses of corners of buildings, where they're trying to lock you into natures of, in other words, they were trying to describe simultaneously good ways and bad ways, both evil. The nature of relationship between me and Mike Roberts and me and that black kid who I don't know the name of. So I have to refer to as a black kid now. And this is also, I self-promote. And this is also, I'm not making a joke at all. I do that because of the background nature and how they react and don't react. And that's measured and maintained where and how the breaching method exploited everyone since you guys were kids. So it has the corner, there are people in the Britain Superior Court and with other Hartford courts that have rules of predicate acts in Rocky Hill and along Route 3 and along Route 3 in Wethersfield, where and how they are victim predators, hyper victim predator, and everyone's speaking through others as collusions. That's why people are lying to you. That's why when they tell you the truth, they don't even realize the significance. Everyone is messed up logically. And there are all kinds of medical families attaching people to fake words including kids, about bad things that happen to themselves. Has recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed consciously men and women were from Central Connecticut State University have roles with criminally foreign influence uses of kids' names. As collusions, they also timed with influences on off the campuses through police forms and courts and political juxtaposed with overt criminal enterprises, private one, and seriousness of A through Z relative to this. If you catch them doing something, don't forget these are the people that catch people doing things. They replace it with fabricated audio and video. They have more forced roles with juxtaposed distinct natures of organized crime and uses of them consciously with the campuses I went to. Sickly distinctly when I was in grammar school, sickly distinctly when I was in middle school, and when I was in high school, also non-distinctly. And the same people involved with predicate acts right now on and off Trinity College in Central Connecticut State University. And I never had a conversation with Joshua Stryker. The day of that night, they tried to make an exception, pretending I know him. That's when they had the bomb thing tied to Rocky Hill. Recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. All these ties to a former Mayor Gold. Also with the people that planted evidences and have people take fake pictures and they pretend to know you behind your back. They take a fake picture, make an exception, pretend you don't know them. The people I don't know at all, like a Joshua Julian. And he admitted that he was telling lies. There was one time that my neighbor told me to hand the cup. They wanted to put an X on my hand with a I forgot, Daryl Chandler. I didn't want the X on my hand because I had the parking spot. I knew it was a setup. And I don't drink, by the way. They're always trying to make me look like I was drinking, out and doing drugs, alcohol. I mean, you know what I mean? From when I was a kid, people with connections to themselves. And then they make it look like I was with their peer in ways that weren't real, and with ones that weren't real. And they're jumping in when we need to speak about those other ways we could discern the predicate acts delivery system method. And where relevant, hyper additionally, people have been blaming other things, others ourselves, where it is an answer that is increasingly relevant with the parts of American history. In particular, has been left out of subject treatments. And the value of exceptions has been left out. The Reddit the Reddit pages has roles with the intelligence community. For example, with roles with leaders of the kids, with different natures of pictures of the kids appearing harmless, upskirt pictures, and they have roles with uses of them on Twitter, and with places where a principal was reportedly involved with that, and is also recorded having been involved with that. Where also the news media has roles with police forms, also on off their location. I don't know if they train at these locations like with the apartments, but that's what they communicated. Is but way less than is way worse is associated with it. It had never been unhinged and been demonstrated per the how it is exploiting us at 1/3/5. identities of the ground, conjunction that nature has to itself as ourselves. Where and how the cell, nuclear cell, body, cell wall, they come also with the value of the identity of sequence nature in reception of the gases mixture coming into them, and in reception of the water and minerals with that, the ground and the sky. And so before everyone's inventing and reinventing things, we have to understand how hyper-additional works relative to this identity of value progression that cannot to be defined as an ism. And pantheism is the science about this, is the method of it that is more probable while it is simultaneously more practical than that which we have conceived. It says right up in the beginning of the Old Testament and in the end of the Quran, it says in the beginning of the Quran, you don't have to, if you're a Muslim or not, even especially if you're a Muslim or not, differentially. I'm paraphrasing. For the slightest reason, if you don't agree about what's being said or an aspect or nature of a mosque, you're not supposed to pray in it. It says all you have to do is agree to call the hyper simultaneous Allah or not. And this does not have discord with a Trinity named the Trinity, not named Jesus. See, there are identity thefts against our founders' roles. There are identity thefts against Jesus' roles, needs and natures relevant to where and how we are syntactically manifesting. This has been managed, maintained, self-cultivated. Roles with that propagated as the Republic abridged, as its campuses functions, its systems, as the ground's identity of voice, where it is all things different to show us all that thing which is hyper the same. So when any of the different parts of our body are positive to themselves, they're positive to the other grouped and together the species. I mean the species body too, but to the individual. See, this breaching method knew worse than groupthink. It knew that groups can't defend the finite. And so it made exceptions. Exception nature self-value by them when they fight with logic or keep their mouth shut and play games. They even have a guy in the intelligence community that does not know me with his kid. First day I had his kid. I don't know his name either. I never had a class with him. In the middle of my high school cafeteria, for example. And it's nothing personal. This is manifest at every campus and between them. Just you got even presidents, and see that president/chief, they're incompatible volumes. But not in other words, there's a method of making the president's individual voice force trick to entertain her. To entertain locations, areas, and states, voices individually grouped in together, criminally foreign influence, positive, negative treatments, identity treatment simultaneously. So long that that's differential too. Because everyone wants to be able to speak about positive and negative. They have to do them apart from that identity of value progression. There's hyper native pure. American history requires telling and understanding how the identity of the Native Americans individually grouped and together. It was measured and maintained, separated from this what the colonists had been separated from too, and replaced with other through their own law, but against everyone from outside of countries individually grouped and together now saw value in themselves in ways they didn't realize would be used remotely or how it could be, and invested everything it caused and causes and maintains, blamed on other things, blamed on others, and or blamed on themselves. Exactly, even when correctly, exactly the way they wanted and need, which is why it is hyper relevant that we address criminal incidents and predicate acts methods. The people that have the databases associated in the telephones associated with the locations of the news media, how we were forced and are forced to use, how we're forced to use mobile phones. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying every aspect, every difference has applications and had applications. By that hyper sophistication, that had nothing to do with them where and how that's exploited. So, in other words, we can put a whole news industry networks. We should have networks on Sunday sitcom. And I'll put the order of it. People just draw their cartoon, make it work. And then whatever value it makes, that is owned by a hyper. I mean by an animate thing that you guys make. See, we have to do things that our countries individually grouped together as a species, where we are all simultaneously victim of the same thing. Because simultaneously recorded worse is a simultaneously too. No one knew how to respond to this. No, where and how it is relevant, where and how it is manifest. This identity that is a possession of value that way, mimicking how identity is possession of value. I mean, how identity is mimicking how identity is manifest. And hyper differentially, conversely, hyper simultaneously, as sequence / simultaneous nature, where and how more and more of that identity, there's a bunch of things constantly, and some things variably. Again, with juxtaposed with that is special difference. I never heard of special. I never knew that what's his name? The guy involved with relativity theory of relativity, Einstein, that he had special relativity. He outlined also a part of his theory. When I was trying to tell you guys, the special difference is critical / hypercritical here, as three identities, but relative to where and how. It is the extent we could discern of the volume that is all things at once as itself, that which no other thing could be, to invent. And therefore, we're even though we have the minimalist extent, its complete identity of relationship to itself is only increasing with the value of that simultaneously. And the value of that is also only increasing. And the relativity of that being positive to the identity that is to come and to the identity that really was true before. That is, again, now being and having been told by identity grounds, locations, uses, names, time treatments, fact treatment, nature treatments. He said, he said, she said that leaves out details and the timing of when people say it and are perceiving that being said, but not saying anything. For example, they have reality television contracts and they have contracts with the identity of Dave Chappelle. Recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with this identity theft, fraud, slander method. Where and how it's nothing personal. Comedy Central, if you will help me, you'll be the first ones not to be on network criminally foreign influence. Relative to, in other words, when someone asks to have a response for the campuses that have been putting fake things in databases. And so, in other words, they took pictures of me, apparently, demonstrably, at and create to make it look like and made it look like I know them at a park near me when I was a kid with people I don't know. And now those there was exceptions. Those are the people I know from exceptions that were criminally made as roles with the Joshua Julian, further with the as one of the people recorded involved with the agencies and the courts and the police forms involved. Also with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, timed on and off the principal child abusers campus, and with their uses of Facebook. So even if it wasn't her, there is a Celeste Wells I do not know, and I never saw her on the middle school campus except for one time. That quick exception was a demonstration, a confirmation of her roles with names that were involved with predicate acts that from my grammar school that involve methods of people's uses of names with people they don't even know and exploitations of that where they make fake exceptions relevant. Also relevant is where they have mayors involved and the police forms involved. So a former police chief Cintron and 1 years ago have roles with the same house involved with a Phil Cololo. The only time I saw him outside of his car, I don't know if that was him in his car one time. I don't even know if I've even seen him in a car. But one time he was swerving his bike on my street. Now this is after he was already recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with the Bob Chase, involved with some wire crimes, with a principal child offender. And more people were involved with that, were involved with the leaderships of the schools. And the response when we used their name, they brought their names up, and I didn't get to speak yet. And they hid things, they fabricated audio and video to prevent me from speaking and replace what's actually recorded as wire crime methods they use and as mail crime methods they use as their roles using and having used interbranch locations to stack predicate acts into the databases. Whole bunch of people tied to a Mendez family, police families, when they were kids that I never had classes with, and I never had classes with them. They're involved on and off Fox Connecticut News and spots next to it, which is also next to with other spots also next to that and everything, and with the state next to the state capitol, on off the state capitol. These are people involved with filming fake things and hiding what comes before that, locking people needing to hide what came before that. And we're relevant is that how that breaching method, what's one of the things it is and was sickly distinctly against everyone, our founders and everyone else, the Native Americans, the colonists, and we have to treat these as subjects and the relevance of things. And if we have a difference with someone, oh, you're crazy. Okay, have the experts find out. Then they torture the person. They were doing that before the World Trade Center attack. These same medical families and police forms, ones with badges, foreign and domestic, recorded how kept roles also as victim predators per their class placements. Everyone will tell you they were only victims and didn't know how to react. But you have to get them onto paper. And if you don't get them onto paper, then they're going to keep being coached from off their locations, plural, from the roles even singular, with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his lawyer, Robert Chevery, no, right around the corner from the Harriet Beecher Stowe Mark Twain house with themselves there. Also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with investigations and investigators. And the names that on off that with class placements, having me go there with people tied to Jonathan Mayano, involved with sequence shifts, involved with the corner of one time. There was one exception, I believe. There was one exception I remember. I walked by him the only time I ever knew him in high school. But when except for that, they made me stay back. And if I fought that, which I could have done easily, I would not have been able to figure out and demonstrate and counter what I caught recorded. And that was because of an English teacher that was, I don't know her name. I never had a personal conversation with her. She's one of the ones also involved with names confessions that brought up Pandoff families and people associated with them on all sides of the high school that are Chris Walters and others that were abused by men and women with the intelligence community a whole bunch of different ways. Forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to roles, planting fake things into locations, into databases, pretending illusions tied to that. It's spreading lies about people and then demonstrating and confessing it's recorded tied to the roles with Trinity College criminally and CCSU and Quinnipiac. Then it makes the person sound like those places are bad places. So they simultaneously influence people also personally criminally involved. But they're forging and switching names with them. And I don't know their names, but they know mine. These are there's a girl there involved with this, involved, and they also have roles with this Joshua Julian, and so there's a roommate of the cousin. In other words, let's go to there's a Bob Chase with a Whiting forensics place, who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, has roles with predicate acts with child offenders. One is named through that, and as people involved with them at the same times consciously, who had roles with predicate acts on off Whiting forensics when I was a baby, and they had roles quoting, bringing up on the Facebook page of the grammar school of a principal child abuser that was also used to force, bringing up a fake stories that the news brought up regarding criminal enterprises and where and how no private ones are juxtaposed and the subjects are forced apart. Oh yeah, vaccines. In other words, not y'all, y'all. And in other words, this website idea will only work. We need your help. It's very simple. We need it to be official, and you guys will keep the money where it's checked. And we could have this conversation without um, about how it works. Because recorded relevant is by the breaching method distinctly from our own measuring and maintaining exploited. Self-valued, where and how the parties their difference and the exceptions, their difference in those natures individually grouped and together, that difference that is measured and maintained by a breaching method distinctly from our own being having been absent from our logic, and if and where and how we try to speak, communicate, other, that person at each age is attached to short words that are changed. And increasingly, everyone has fake things attached to ourselves. And they have our measurements of ourselves and relationships to ourselves that are increasingly not only unnatural, consciously, criminally foreign influenced, and shown needs and means to hide increasingly perfectly, better than perfectly, their roles with the breaching method since they were kids. Wire crime methods that the intelligence community had and has roles with. For example, individually grouped in together that were timed criminally foreign influence uses of corners of streets with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, then exploited as the roles with this Joshua Julian and the Joshua Straker that have roles with the boys and girls that confessed and demonstrated them involved with identity thefts and frauds against me online with the agencies and people on off the state judicial branch offices involved with former director of the FBI Robert Luskin. Also, with in other words, they made fake exceptions pretending to know me. I don't know Mike Roberts. All exception nature. They set up to lock people incapable of torturing. And I'm not making opinions. They make you say things about others. You make them use the names and make people speak about privacy because they've been attaching everyone to fake word. They attach my family to fake outcomes in cases relativity, like an NLRB case. My father won against a local 230. That is also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed on off Fox Connecticut rules, Connecticut news, involved with names on off Hangdog Lane and Two Rod Highway that used and had my name used with them. Relevant where also they are differentially criminally foreign influence, not wanting to be, but increasingly all exceptions and exception nature are made for everyone. And this is relevant where and how state. These are names with Sandy Hook. These are names. The one kid looks just like the reported shooter in a Colorado shooting, and there were people from Colorado involved with the Domain family that is involved with smoke. People involved with smoke, crimes with smoke and poison, and police equipment on all sides of my house through time. Since as one of the people involved with my algebra classes, where connections to them on those campuses were made as people that also further illusions with people that went to my grammar school that I didn't even know. That, in other words, that didn't even go to my grammar school, but they were in the same town, and with people that were in my grammar school, I didn't even know them. All exception nature, they attach everyone to fake words with each other, themselves, and with our family members, the ones around us. And then while that's being sustained, then there's the phenomenon of syntactical exceptions, and they exploit that too, relevant to with where and how. The answers are there, where they've blamed other things, others themselves, for where and how the course of black pupils' whites of eyes became abridged, and so remains. So in other words, we make it like a better than a movie industry because this is about hyper theater. They're about theater. They're about speaking about mental health care as a little fake punks that are too coward to admit that they could fathom when someone says Interbranch are still making stuff up. Get down. But they have the right to. Get down. All exceptions, exceptionage, or demonstrations, same thing. We need to get them on paper, Your Honor. President / chiefs. Chief never goes away in any play. And that is to discern where and how both the hyper-native identity and its syntactical relevance and the Native American identity and its syntactical relevance and relativity to the Constitution, it is abridged. And you know that the relativity of that sequence of understanding how that was sustained against them. Really? No. So this is relevant to where and how. They have mental experts. They have mental delusions. They have physical delusions, nature delusions, and identity delusions. Also, with judges, they've been getting away with it because they need to hide what they were doing at locations from years earlier, all along roads and routes, corners of streets. There's a little trap door people push people into. And then they can't call because if they try to call, not just if the phone's too long. One of the reasons they have Joe Biden countering how people in prisons can't call and now they can call longer is because the people that run the prisons, CCSU has recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. The FBI has been planting with a whole bunch of people recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. The moral families are involved with the intelligence community, with judges and prosecutors that have been planting evidences relevant to where and to how they were sitting outside of a cafeteria when I came through there one day. I don't know that woman's name, but it has something to do with their rules with Korean families and Taekwondo places. And Daryl Chandler, who pretended to know me by making an exception, walking up to me with a clipboard when I was in 9th grade, and he's involved with one of the things that is common between that people that were involved with predicate acts and identity thefts, fraud, slanders, and federal evidences, crimes, falsified police reports, wire crimes. One of the things common between them, I forgot what the train of logic was, but we put down this hyper theater, and we're going to go by the principles, just like in boxing when the boxing announcer says the principles. That's why a lot of people like boxing. That who go into it, I surmise, because that and kung fu theater. There's this life we're trying to figure out. And it's showing nature's nature and the value of that only increasing is showing us discern what death and life are simultaneously. Because the hyper simultaneous comes with this. The definition of that can be read only through its identity of relationship to itself. That is, as the order of the finite, as the order that is active, and as the order that is progressively valued here now, where we are actually capable of our actual extent of discerning. See, but everyone was forced, tricked, hurt to be able to not to be able to fathom anything else. Not that they couldn't fathom other. They couldn't fathom how going from the transition, from having entertained what we cannot entertain, and how we could do this is by getting a value, not just a bunch of money, but as a means to show, and we can work as a method. We couple every dollar with, you know, our own blood, sweat, and tears to do whatever we have to do to counter that tactically denatured identity of relationship to his ground. That it has itself as the ground, hyper additional from how it is itself and from how it is ourselves simultaneously. And that's why simultaneously, we have the phenomenon of not being ground, but we are ground, because it's ground. Wherever it is, the hyper simultaneous, even though it's the smallest piece of it, its complete identity of relationship to itself is only perfectly increasing constantly. And the value of that is too. Ooh. So it wanted and needed us to speak, to whisper Creek, to understand. So we could take 13 with the Native Americans, we can make 13 hyper positions for them and for our founders, because their resistance enabled our founders to counter extort the other founders, to force everyone to a state of chaos, less controllable, but still that was still complete possession. They had to hide their original roles with it and method and what they want to say. The Quran and the Old Testament were written per science. If you leave out faith, with consciousness that knew differentially, people will be either hurting or speaking bad against, or hurting syntactically, speaking against or speaking good for the religions and valuing them out of sequence, valuing the significance that is only increasingly valued at the beginning of the Old Testament and at the beginning of the Quran. It's supposed to love people who are Muslim or not. And the people who are Muslim, you don't have to pray in any mosque you don't want. It's for something reason you don't agree with the interpretation of it. All you have to do is agree to call the identity of the hyper simultaneous Allah or not. See, this is relative to where and to how, and as means to discern hyper recorded extortions of country and slavery of the humanity as countries group too exists. And it is differentially the groups, differentially simultaneously, the group in charge and the group not in charge. That's the phenomenon. That's really why we have third world countries. The human species body of volume is stacked upon tactically denatured ground, earth. Space means come out of nowhere. If we have your backing, imagine if you guys working with us, the nature of what do they call it? Where the president can write stuff. Executive orders better than bipartisan, but it has to be in accordance with that, which is not only going to accord with all the other countries, make everywhere at once positive, and means to leverage over, all those negative, all the ways the identity of negative value needs progression appears necessary, appears needed, appears to be self-valued properly, increasingly valuing how it was never self-valued properly. So there's a whole industry. And we put the colonial regime, and we take James Madison to counter positions for Marbury versus Madison, and for the Constitution unabridged, and regarding the methods recorded of pretending that people, if they don't know what amendment is what, they don't know what they're talking about. The whole conversation is involved in entertaining the debate. It's entertaining what they leave out, leaving out the breaching method. They're leaving out roles with it. They're leaving out a singular use of it. Because not just because of singular uses, because of a whole bunch of uses that everyone shared. Because to all locations, every single location, the same way a computer uses one system to all locations. It's the correlation nature, not the computer. Excuse me. In other words, the breaching method, the hyperarchetypal criminal enterprise. Criminal insidiousness conceived as an identity of the ground's identity of relationship to itself. That is an identity of that is value as length of IDs, for example. Forced space nature transfer is more probably and is simultaneously more practically how to explain what length of IDs was about. Pantheism was more probably about, also came with the God variable. See, these are websites that we can make for the games to make it individually grouped and together. Everyone want and need to open up nations for everyone so we can counter the breaching method thoroughly enough, long enough, that we can make that we can make subjects treatments and names treatments and exceptions treatments and exception nature treatments that we could not utter syntactically. And while everyone pretends freedom of speaks or has spoke. The clear and the hyper clear, they too can be as smoke. In other words, we'll put that down. Pantheism is a method, God variable. God is a variable where we only know by one, there's no way we can know except for one way. And that uses that might, which is a quality of, it's a method that uses identity's inherent active, progressive course the way it is tied to our syntax nature. It wanted and needs us to use words like value for the same ways, but hyper additional ways from we are being allowed to per the ways we have, the phenomena of it being the same ways, being simultaneously tactical terror from it, and people are like, "Oh, this is like when people are like, it's this or that," and people are you're getting frustrated because there's criminal and citizens. There are criminal and citizens natures of positive treatment and negative treatment that go with it, and wherever there's a positive or negative treatment, there's an identity treatment. So by switching the colors and by keeping Native American the same, mixed in will be the way it would be, like with the demonstration of it video. I mean, in other words, this is a project we could do to get, you know, this comes with, oh, we have to do this as a species, realizing. See, what denies the only increasing significance of how criminal insidiousness from semi ancient times is self valued with the logic of people, where and how the relevance and the relativity of history comes up, you know, and the not and or the non relativity of it. See, this system uses thing where it has things the extremes, whereas hot or cold and warm, and the value of that and demonstration all through also simultaneously also of present being two additional identities of sequence slash simultaneous nature that also come with relativity that has nothing to do with the subjects, no matter what subject you bring up, unless it's itself as well. So people deny the significance of subject treatments relative to criminally foreign influence uses of town offices, criminally foreign influence uses of all elections locations, criminally foreign influence uses of the Northern Army, criminally foreign influence uses of the Southern Army, state collusions, forced to hide each other, to fight each other, relative to where and to how. There was still the breaching method measuring and maintaining who was behind the counter extortion of our founders. But it was a counter extortion that was significant enough. It was capable enough to lock in place. Means to get said that we should get Marbury versus Madison. All real justice should satisfy all appearances of real justice. And we should get um, the Constitution unabridged. We should have that understood simultaneously. Roles with a breaching method against Native Americans is not all exceptionally well. Then how the president, it was president slash chief note. The Native Americans, everyone was fighting with each other because this was sustained. This is a human fact, human nature, criminal re-engineering of the ancient republic for which we stand. That was revealed. Anything hyper additional invented was to its identity of relationship to itself that could only be, they would look for the identity of the is more probable practical convict. They would look for the identity of the campus of the republic of our subject treatments at other locations to see if it was correct. Tactical ulterior from how we do now. Because this breaching method knew that syntactically we would have to describe it itself. There was a Robert Rodrigue, who brought up the word logistics. He's one of the ones on Route 3 in Wethersfield. involved with the medical community, involved with untimely deaths, and roles with um doctors, nurses, everyone where everyone's forced to speak through others. Those databases are being used criminally for an influence. Per method that also used databases since before computers criminally for an influence. So there was a Facebook ad on television with a woman who looks just looked like a girl when I was a kid. That looked her name was Celeste Wells, and all along Wells Road, and from where it begins near where George Washington had to leave the slavery entrenched. A counter story that rolls with it in the north, and the witch trial place right next to it, and places next to that are still victims slash hyper victims, where everyone is forced to hear things through other people's names through others first, and where and how that's recorded, exploited at other locations. All investigators, and perception, to an extent, it's recorded. How the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, that and worse, and the seriousness of people's logic A through Z relevant to this, or they change your words. So people there are the intelligence community from Trinity College and people from UPS have roles with New Britain on off Central Connecticut Sound State University with a whole bunch of people on off campuses, intercities, planting fake things in elementary schools. Worse, above and below that, rolls with it. See, now everyone's a victim that doesn't know how to respond, while simultaneously being a hyper victim, so to discern that which is actually recorded, that which American history is about, how they're a victim simultaneously the breaching method and through themselves, and while pretending other for the breaching method that employed as an application. Same way programs work. Blamed on other things, others, or selves, what it caused, what it maintains, what it does, and how it uses that. Because that's distinct from all the uses of it that are hyper additional to it. And while pretending other. And that sequence defenses of that, it means to get away with it, needs to get away with it. That was also propped by the breaching method, only having been known that way. Anyway. So people walk by and plant little illusions in databases, and then like there's one kid's got his father involved. They had angry eyes when I was with the intelligence community. On and off, it had something to do with that corner too of Hangdog Lane and Route 3. In other words, but rather having me go into all that, let's get these names on paper. These are the people that have been putting fake exception. In other words, Joshua Julian's involved with the Facebook page, and the people involved with a principal child abusers campus, who was involved with more wire crimes and names and confessions involved. And they also made fake emails and hid this by replacing the audio and video with fabricated transcripts to force that, as the roles with the police forms and such, further with the on campuses part of the principal proven off campuses involved with child abuses, and on even on shopping centers. And these are roles where they're differentially criminally foreign influence, where no one wants to use it as our own associated with the shopping centers, but from off those locations, already been on off them, collusions with their roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders, illusions, a whole bunch of families with demoralized families, people tied to all natures of politicians, like I forgot his name. Nothing personal too. They try to make it seem personal. Um, and then you have to say things like that, and they want to separate things and do things because they push people into that door, and they're pretending, they're not letting people, if you try to write something, they're gonna be able to read it before you do anything. You're not gonna be able to tell right. These people have, and they're pretending that's why their motivations are because people did wrong. They're bringing their names up and then pretending they want privacy, and they're exploiting the exceptions where that's relevant too. Simultaneously, we have to be led by the hyper invisible. So we can't just go by the predicate. I'm not just saying to, in other words, we want to show how everyone's been reacting wrong, but by preventing me writing since I was a kid and making me use other people's names. Certain ways of Pandolph family made me use a principle of has confessed and demonstrated roles with the intelligence community, with predicate acts, and with people on and off Central Connecticut State University and other campuses through time, and on off spots in Hartford near the Capitol and near Fox Connecticut News, and other ways they communicated and demonstrated about me. Central Connecticut State University recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They influenced other ways simultaneously a Pandolph family to the furtherance of abuses of them too since they were kids. Involved all along Wells Road, from Weathersfield to and where it starts with the part in Old Weathersfield with George Washington, the Witch Trials Place, all the way from there to Central Connecticut State University, through from Weathersfield through Newington and on off Central Connecticut State University on all sides of that campus. There are names that film illusions, where and how used remotely are all investigators in identities of perception. And so as is the subject of American history. That preaching method. That is the method of what designed the suburbs in Ukraine, in Russia. It came from before our founding parents were born here and there. The method by this tactically denatured suburbs, designed to cause negative value nature progression and acts of nature, designed not just to cause that, but to cause simultaneously needs, means, and natures of collusions with a singular breaching method, collusion, through other motivations, natures, needs, interests, only discernible, but this is more finite and is greater than. Well, as the value of their logic is so relevant, where we have people speaking about mental health, for example, as people who speak for Hollywood and the other identities of media, distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously. So we need hyper journalism because, for example, WFSB attached me to fake words. A whole bunch of people who pretend that I never had a class with pretended to know me at different times from backgrounds who have roles with wire crimes and mail crime methods, whole methods of them with the Weathersfield police and with various natures of courts. Part of their methods that recorded this is them pretending not to realize, and sequence shifts and their motivations narratives. now has something to do with their uses of those corners of the streets. They also affected a part of the confessions by the people involved with relative falsified police reports and forced collusions with the police forms that took it and took them in relationship to things that, you know, where they had the people that were had crimes against them and the people committing the crimes as collusions against other that were just present. And all exceptions, exception nature, they used consciously, criminally foreign influence, as where and how it's there, it's recorded, means to demonstrate you remote uses of everyone. But this requires not blaming anyone. In other words, I mean, and everyone not pretending to perceive and actually perceiving that someone's trying to speak to get someone attacked by the law or what. Because these are the people that are using the law to attack people that are kept needing to hide life progressions from how they were abused when they were kids to abuse others. As this breaching method forced everyone rolls. Look at your logic with American history when you guys speak for Native American rights. Increasingly, the people who speak for how computers use identity, they cannot afford to discern those revelations that come from understanding how the story, I mean, the truth about the hyper Native American identity and its short words, individually grouped and together. It's medium words. Things that take a long time to say. More and more, it was prevented. Means our humanity, not as them, but while as them, and how nature has us so to discern the breaching method, not just to discern itself now. So syntactically, we have another nature and method and means to communicate with people at all locations. Same way it does. Does not does doesn't the same way it the same way it employed, not non-functional. No, and that functional to itself. We have to just reveal its function just by keeping it real, being this identity of humanity as with this subject treatment. The ground is tactically denatured. The suburbs are. It was designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts in nature simultaneously to present, to propagate collusions with criminal insidiousness natures of positive means to cause positives, value nature progressions, acts in nature. More and more, the only ones available, criminally foreign influence. That's what they were doing, for example, while it was being sustained Native Americans against Native Americans. So it needed and effectively employed people pretending passions and emotions and believing it when they say divide and conquer was a strategy there. This is the divide and employ, unite and employ. Needs to keep the breaching methods possession of their logic. People A through Z. Roles with the exceptions attached to, in the exception nature, those people attached to changed words. Second, you try to do. You ever wonder? It was recorded. Everyone in the world wants this fake preaching when they bring up color. They get away with it because they have colors that's already assigned. Well, formally, what can't defend itself. Overt criminal enterprises, private ones, still uncharged, still forced self-value in some context. You know, they forced our founders to self-value roles with natures of wealth people. That the only reason they were entertained by themselves even is because of the breaching method, a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise that we can syntactically counter. And to make it understood, we could have an anti-hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. And to make that understood, we could have a cartoon version of it that is hyper additional to and as ourselves, and where we can measure and maintain means to increasingly discern. Are we positive simultaneously to the five identities of order that come with and has the extent of the discernment of that which is all things at once? This is a contemplation that's not just had at the last second, where that's what it is with the courts. Self-value that with a certain kind of person never heard of it, distinctly from the overt criminal enterprises, distinctly from the private ones, distinctly from the identities of employments A through Z, including distinctly from teachers, distinctly from professors. These are juxtaposed with police forms, and so many involved, pretending others speak bad things about police. All exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of the same thing. And why and how that hasn't been countered syntactically. It's recorded tied to this because there's conscious uses of the other countries involved here and there. They attach, in other words, no girl. I mean, no woman, let alone a girl. When we're young, then when we're young, no woman wants to deal with things that require describing how the discernment of how overt criminal enterprises and private ones in the three branches of government and insidiousness of people A through Z and uses of religion all get juxtaposed with uses of names too, involved with sequence shifts too, if you try to do it, because then they pretend you're bringing up everyone's name. We have there's still roles with the identity theft, fraud, slander methods, sickly, non-distinctly against everyone. Well, because of it was sickly distinctly and is sickly distinctly against everyone now still, specifically to keep how sickly, non-distinctly from being discerned. Now one has learned. Just the process of trying to see this brings instant means out of nowhere, brings instant understanding out of nowhere. So New York City's got all these people packed, and now they have an immigrant problem. It's all right. No, we move as one this way. You guys can give our executive order. All the political stuff will be controlled because we're going to have a hyperjournalism. And they've been using wire crime methods with their phones, distinctly from wire crimes with the broadcasts. They've been planting evidences at locations and broadcasted as their roles with names and interbranch locations, stacking fake things into databases. Forgiveness is not to give up against that. Forgiveness is not to leave out the others involved, the other motivations, nature's needs, interests, and relativity of that involved. which is involved through time with databases, but also uses of at campuses, parks, did corners of streets, ground distinctions, things involved with description. So they have the phones of Weathersfield schools demonstrably involved, interbranch, intercities, with names and background, with investigations, investigators, and their sources. They just pack too many roles with predicate acts and relative to time connected uses of it made that are connected for them. Now, the means to discern this is that there's a man named Emmett who was also one of the ones names brought up, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with courts and with police forums and school leaders of the schools, further involved with child abuses, wire crimes with the kids, and confessions made on the answering machine to me and others, with a bunch of calls where they kept bringing in more subsidies to hide what I caught them doing with Robert Rodriguez and people with the name Scalora, also involved with predicate acts on off my street with names. I never saw them on my street, but they're involved on and off my street with wire crimes with Weathersfield police and one switching names on my street through time also. They have roles with dozens of falsified police reports, even more than they're there because they switch arresting officers' names, put a charge but no writing. It's tricks they do. So we need to get them on paper though. Whoa. And there's a Joshua Schumack too, with his mother and people associated with them within the intelligence community too, on off their house too, people in the spots next to their house. Also involved with some KKK themed, Jewish themed, black themed, military police involved with predicate acts, child abuses, identity theft, fraud, slanders, between campuses connected through time. So, control the mind. Please get them onto paper. If it was really, so the military has roles with Dean Judd's kid, and military has roles with bars next to the and the courts and the police firms have roles with bars next to Trinity College, including sexual ones. Right when you come, these are crazy things. I hope you're well. I hope you're well too. This is for the world. We need to have the science, what we actually have as our means to be able to voice it, because we'll all help each other, but we need the president to have a executive order, and it has to be where the parties aren't going to kill each other because they can't do anything that's even positive or negative. Even the positive treatments are criminal and seriousness because we're in this trap from some ancient times that has been abridged from and what our founders access to communicate for themselves. Okay, thank you. Ooh, vaccines, thank you. I'm just gonna end this here though because this is the plan though, to have the president / chiefs not standing because they have the means to make it legitimately and put it into a form where no one could steal from it, and because the intellectual base of it is charity, but it is also science, it is also functional, all kind of ways. The God variable. See, we are automatically the nature of the hyper simultaneous, but we are paying attention to details the way and how it needs us to, or not. But now it is increasingly not. That's why species go extinct. All exceptions exception nature are in demonstration of the same thing. Boxing, we could consolidate all these things that all kinds of people want to counter all kinds of different ways. You know why people love animals? Means out of nowhere. If we're going to make we're going to move to change the nature of means and needs to even think about want and need a war. Takes a lot to want to go and have a war. It's going to hurt anyone involved. Even if they win, it's going to come at a cost. Especially when people don't realize this. Until relative to how the sciences have been self-valued and bridged since ancient time. So, end stream. Okay, so thank you. Control our minds this way. Many pray. We have to give it ground, though. We have to give it grounding. But see, they have the approach to each of the natures of industry, each of the locations involved in where and how. We have an aside syndrome. I'm not a doctor, but it's relative to where and to how. They get away and got away with blaming other things, other themselves, for what nature keeps demonstrating to us increasingly. Like a breaching method being involved with all kinds of subjects treatments. It's inseparable. It's inseparable from them. The same, just like the identity is of the subject of the identity of the hyper simultaneous is. All exceptions in exception nature. They could keep inventing more and more, but they're in demonstration of the same thing. But that thing is an identity of negative value nature progression, self-valued, and that simultaneously can't afford to have discerned things clear. We all move here. Oh, it's just because I'm a salesperson. Oh, that's my job. Of course, it's your job. They employed all identity of the ground locations. No. The collusion with that location, that method that had everyone back to those crazy laws. Worse than witch trials. Still effective applications of the causes of witch trials, real or made up. Blame the other things, others ourselves, from how we're supposed to deal with this. But what our founders actually wanted and just communicated. They didn't have the means. All exception nature and demonstration, same thing, until we need to have that understood. Discern. There are means to discern it. Please, there is one way. Okay, thank you. Many pre-vaccines. Jesus.